Good morning. Rambam to learning Perek Zayin, Hilchis Matnos Aniyim, Halacha Aleph, Beis, Gimel, and Hey. But I'm going to quickly go through them and note that the Rambam has a seemingly unique approach to the halachas of tzedakah, and it might be that it's followed in Shulchan Aruch, but we'll have to see. So the Rambam starts off mitzvahs hasei litein tzedakah la'aniyim kifi ma shera'ui la'ani, as what is fitting. The lady is going to explain what that means. The fitting. That's if you can afford it. Shenema Pesach Tiftach Yad, and he brings the pasuk. You got to make them have a good life. And then we'll skip halacha beis, halacha gimel. V'ma shechosar ha'oni at the mitzuva litama. Gotta give him what he's missing, whatever he's missing in life. And he goes through a list of items that he's missing. You give him if he's missing clothing, if he's missing furniture, he needs to get married. Same thing with a woman. Then he adds another 2 points. One, if this ani was used to very expensive means of travel, he used to have a horse. Those times, a horse was I'm not sure if it was a Porsche or if it was a Volkswagen or if it was a Cadillac or if it was a whatever, any kind of car. And he used to have a chauffeur, have a Ratzlefanav, and the Eved would run before him. And then he became poor. We need to supply him with that. But then the Rambam adds, and he brings the pasuk, and then he adds, but you don't have to make him rich. Okay. Now, in halacha hey, he suddenly comes to the following conclusion that 1 second, that's all these past 4 halachas are about a person who can afford it. What happens if a person can't afford it? And he says, he tells it to you as a story. The ani comes and asks what he needs. Now, it's interesting that he stresses it that way, but it's clear that the Rambam has learned tzedakah means the main tzedakah is when you give it to the poor person. And you can't afford to give it to him. It doesn't explain what level of not affording, where we're going to see that the Shulchan Aruch does and the Torah does. Now it just says, you can't afford. Then you give him according to what you could afford. Now here begins a process. Comma, how much? So either you give a fifth is the mitzvah min hamufchar. Giving 20% of your income is a mitzvah hamufchar. A tenth is a average person, and less than that is a person who doesn't have a good eye. And then there's a second halacha that you need to give over the course of the year a minimum amount. Otherwise, you just did not do any tzedakah day. Okay. So what strikes me is a couple of things. First of all, the Rambam could have just, he started off saying, Im oisi yodem maseges, that's what he should get. Should give you masharot. He right away should have told us, and what if not yodem maseges? So it's interesting, because if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber and the Tur, they bring it all in one shot. Shir nisinasa, the amount you give. So he said, if you're the masegas, you give this amount. And you're the masegas, you give less. And he goes through the same amount. 20%, 10%, less. The same thing with the Mechaber and Shulchan Aruch. Why did the Rambam see it fit to separate it into two separate categories of halachas? First, to go through 4 halachas of the guy who could afford, and then finally mentioning what he could have just brought the beginning that tzedakah has shear. Shear aleph is if you can afford it. Yadem haseges. Shear beis if you can't. And in there are 3 shiurim finished, like everybody else does. Shear nisyanos. That strikes you right away that the Rambam is out to tell you something different than everybody else. Now, there are many other points to note in the Rambam. The Rambam talks, and so does the Shulchan Aruch, to mention that, about giving a fifth as a mitzvah and a mufcha. This same Rambam, in Hilchas Erechen v'Charomim, which precedes this, wrote that don't squander your money because you'll become poor, chas v'sholom, and that's not midas chasidus, and that's silliness, foolishness. And then he writes, "Ubazeh ukiyetze boy omru chachamim," that he's a chassid shaita if he does this. Now here he adds a line: "Elakol hamifazer memoinoi b'mitzvos al yifazer yesem echensh." If you do squander money, don't do it more than a fifth. Okay. So here he tells it as a don't go more than a fifth. The fifth is where you stop. But if you're learning Hilchas Tzedakah, even when he mentions the fifth, he mentions it just as a mitzvah. He doesn't say that you can't go more. Second, he didn't mention the fifth till halacha hey. He went through 4 halachas before he mentioned that you got to stop at a fifth. First he said, give kefir raya. If you read the first 4 halachas, there's nothing about a fifth. Just give. And the same thing with the Mechaber Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't say don't give more. On the contrary, sheer nesinasa. If you're not able to afford, then give that amount. But now when you can afford, give more. So is it? But the Rambam in Hilchas Erechen says, now here in Hilchas Erechen, he focuses on the negative. Don't give more. And here he just says that's the mitzvah mufcha. Now the interesting thing is that these 2 expressions are a difference between how Bavli approaches it and Yerushalmi. We know that this idea of giving a chemish is a takonos usha, meaning in Usha, which is a city with learned scholars, they made a decree: don't give more than a fifth. So they made a decree about giving a fifth. So what does it say there? In Bavli, the expression is don't give more than a fifth. In Yerushalmi, that it says they made an agreement. Give up the fifth for a mitzvah. Person should give a fifth for a mitzvah. According to Bavli, Usha limited. According to Yerushalmi, Usha up to 20%. So the Rambam seems to take both sides, partially Bavli, partially Yerushalmi, which is interesting. Okay. In Sefer Mitzvahs and in the Protei Mitzvahs, where the Rambam mentions the mitzvahs and the minyan mitzvahs, he doesn't talk about giving as much as they need. He just says, give them, strengthen them. At best, there's a lotion there. Just give. And here he seems to stress the giving right away, the amount they need. It's fitting for them. Now, we spoke about a rich man who's used to driving a horse, or let's say a Cadillac, and today he became poor. And for him to drive a regular car is just painful. Or to walk instead of a horse is painful. I'm not sure it applies to Cadillacs in this. I don't know. I don't drive a Cadillac, so I can't tell you. But or a Lexus. So I don't know the difference. But a horse and walking, I do know the difference. And that the Rambam says you have to do. So assuming that would mean if somebody had a car and now he's walking or taking buses, you need to give him a car. That's what I would assume in today's market, in today's world. So the source of that is a Gemara in Ksubis. The Gemara says there's two words in the pasuk. You have to give him day machsoire, enough for what he's missing. Asher yechsar loi, you have to give him that which is missing. So if you read the words, the word day machsoire sounds like a limitation. Asher yechsar sounds inclusive. Because of that, the Gemara says, day machsoire, you don't have to make him rich. It's limited. Asher yechsar loi, you got to give him a horse if he needs it, and a chauffeur, or whatever else that means. The Eved Laretz, I would assume. So, if that's the order of the Gemara, and it's the order of the Psukim, the Rambam reverses. He starts off with explaining that you give what you do give him, and then he tells you don't make him rich. Now, it's not the order of the Psukim, it's not the order of the Gemara. Why did he do that? Which is, again, unconventional for the Rambam to do. Okay, so I believe, and again, I don't know that the Shulchan Aruch and Torah disagree, but the Rambam is here to tell us something. And I believe the Rambam is to tell us, you want to know what mitzvah tzedakah? The definition of tzedakah is supplying the person his needs. That is what tzedakah is. And he brings psukim to show that. That's the main and most important part of tzedakah. Tzedakah is not giving donations. Tzedakah is supplying the needs of the person. And therefore, he doesn't talk about the second level until he's done with this, explaining the main mitzvah tzedakah. And before he tells you don't have to make him rich, he first explains what you do have to do. And he tells you got to give him, you have to give him a horse. He shouldn't be walking. Walking is painful for him. The Rikurkis, who was one of the Mefarshim of the early Mefarshim of the Rambam, says that the Rambam is a result of this first halacha. Now, even though the Gemara doesn't sound like that, but in the Rambam it does. In the Gemara it sounds like you got to give him his needs. If he's a rich person, his needs got to be rich. If he was a rich person, the man is used to living in a mansion and living in this. He doesn't have that. He's missing something. He's missing what he had. So the Gemara just goes straight to the point. If that's the mitzvah tzedakah, then he was rich. He's missing that. But the Rambam first has to establish that. So the Rambam establishes that. Not that the Cooks don't say that part, but I'm just saying that it would make sense. Now the Rambam comes along and says, you need to supply his needs. And to the point that if he was used to a horse, he doesn't walk. If he's used to a chauffeur, he can't do himself. He has a driver taking care of him. Eved Lawrence Lefana. I don't know if that's what it means, but I'm assuming that that's something to that effect. So if the Rikurkis, and now he asks the question, if you got to supply him the needs, the man was rich. So how far is his needs? And his needs are much bigger. His needs are a mansion. He can't live in a 3-bedroom apartment or in a small house. So there's a special halacha in the Torah. Machzorah teaches us that there are certain needs he's going to have to do without. There are needs that you don't do without. Now, what yes and what not. The Chachamim decided what's considered painful. I don't know what the criteria is, but sus is and a house, a mansion is not. But that's the way it's presented in Rambam, because he's taking care, showing you need your importance of giving him his needs, and that's why wealth becomes an issue, because it's a need, whether it's a need or not. Okay, now comes the Rambam. Now comes the Rambam and says that the Rambam holds that when the Torah told you got to give him what he needs, how could you limit it to 20%? You can't limit it to anything. Now, obviously, you can't give away your life. But there's no limitation in his needs. You got to give him his needs. And that's why the Rambam doesn't mention a word in the first four halachas. He doesn't talk about that. Because a guy who can afford does not mean he can afford more 20%. He can afford to give, and still it will not affect his life. Generally, something to that effect. And therefore, there's no numbers, there's no percentages here. It's about the ani. I gotta supply him. I gotta take care of his needs. I gotta take him out of his misery. That's what tzedakah is, taking care of the ani. I gotta take care of him. Oh, but if you come to a person, now the ani shows up, and you can't take care of him now. You can't. It's interesting because in the Tur, he uses a lashon. The Tur uses a lashon. I just find the Tur that use a lashon. In other words, he can't do everything. Again, it's not clear how much of less than everything. I mean, you can give him. He needs $100,000. You can give him 96. Is that mean now you go into a fifth? I don't know. I'm not sure, but that's what he says. And the Mechaber writes a lashon im ein yodei maseges kol kach. In other words, you can't supply him. So now, what happens here is, I think, according to the Rambam, we can't look at the ani. Now we got to look at you. Now we moved it from what the ani is supposed to get, fulfilling his need, to what you need to give. And that's a second stage in Hilchos Tzedakah. That's not the main mitzvah tzedakah. That's the second stage of tzedakah. When you enter into the league of people that are ein yodei maseges people who cannot afford to supply what the ani needs, now we have to start with shiurim. What must you do to be mekayim mitzvah tzedakah? So here there are 3 levels. There's a level of mitzvah amufcha, which is a chemish. There's a level of average, which is 10%, 20%. 20% is the mitzvah amufcha. 10% is average. And then you want to be whatever it is. Give whatever you want, as long as you give a minimum amount over the year. But that's a new aspect of tzedakah, where we're not now focused on supplying the needs of the ani, but we're focused on what can you afford. We moved from the ani to the giver, and that's where shiurim come in. Now, perhaps in Hilchos Erech and Charamen, the Rambam not talking about an ani. Talking about mitzvahs. Use the lashon al yevazbas but mitzvahs. You want to give donations to Erechim. You want to give to the Beis Hamikdash. Charamin, all these great things. The nations are a great, important thing. But it's not an oni de machzeret. There's no de machzeret. So there, the Rambam holds takonas usha. There is al yevazbez yesem mechensh. There, they're worried. As it's brought down the reasoning because you'll become poor. And there's also halachas of how much, whether you give from the Karen or you give from the income. It's a whole different story. There we got to start analyzing. When it comes to giving to a poor person, there's no such a thing. Even, says the Rambam, when we're dealing with giving a poor person based on what you are, on your abilities, because you're not able to give what he needs, you're out of that part of the mitzvah. Now you're in the midst of giving what you can give and what you're required to give. Then there's a new story. Then there is mitzvah and amufcha, then this year. But it's only in the form of mitzvah and amufcha. You can give more. I was thinking perhaps, there's a rule that the Chachamim cannot make a takana against something that says clearly in the Torah. So it's clearly there, you can't make a takana. So perhaps takanas usha that Rambam learns of al yivazmas cannot be on tzedakah. Because the doctor, the Torah clearly says, Dei machzorei ashiach salai. So the Torah is telling you, you got to give what he needs. The second type of giving, which you can't give what he needs, also is not that we don't try to give the ani the best possible. You got to give him, but we made limitations because we're trying to think about your situation, your status, the mitzvah of what you do, but ultimately the ani is the beneficiary. And therefore the Chachamim could not say, they could say, this would be mitzvah namuvcha if I can't give more. And maybe he's trying to, that way you shall me about, they're not arguing. Although they do sound like they're saying different things. I don't know, the Rambam is trying to bridge the two, but if he is, this would be the bridge. So the Rambam holds that different things, tzedakah and all other mitzvahs. And you can't have this halacha in tzedakah. And that makes sense why the orders of the way he brings it. Now, I want to just note that the Rambam and Pirush HaMishnah does not agree with this. You have to look it up in the beginning of Masechtas Peah, where it says, Elu Devarim She'ein Lam Shir. And one of them is Gemilas Chasod. So the Rambam says there are two types of Gemilas Chasod. There's Tzedakah, and there is Gemilas Chasod and Begufa. And he says that Gemilas Chasod doesn't have a shir, is Begufa. But the Mainai, there is a share, and that's a fifth, that's 20%. And you don't have to give more. But even there, the Rambam says, but maybe this Chasidus you can. And he brings the Yerushalmi's lotion, that in Usha they say that a person should give a fifth. He doesn't even bring Bavli, brings the Yerushalmi. And the basic, and he goes through, it's good to read it there, but that's what he's saying. Okay, but we all know that Rambam Sefer Yad HaChazaka, the Rambam and Pirush HaMishnah does not always have to agree, but it seems to me that he doesn't agree with what he wrote there. The two do not sync. I want to just mention an interesting thing. I'm in the sign with this. I saw it brought down in our Oris. I saw it a couple of places. One of them was by Rabbi Eliashiv brings it. It's interesting who he brings, but he brings it. He brings a story that is also brought in the name of the Kutzker. He brings it from Avram Michechana. The same idea. That a Jew came to him, one of the Rebbe or Rebbes from Europe. That wasn't necessarily from the big, great people that would deserve some phenomenal honor. And yet, he gave him unbelievable covet. And I mean, if it was the Kutzkits, it's out of character, but doesn't matter. Then afterwards, they asked him, why did you do this? So he says, because he realized that this guy needs it. He's used to that. So you have to give him day machzeri. So he says that it's an Indian in covet you have is also an Indian of needs. Even though it sounds like the Gemara, generally we're talking only about tzedakah of money, talking about Evian. But a guy has some kind of need, you don't have to necessarily fulfill it. So it would seem that just that they want to say that when the Gemara wanted to have a Havamim, you have to give him wealth. It means it's obviously a little meaning. He's not you're not poor if you can live in a 5-bedroom house and you don't have to live in a 20-bedroom mansion. Or you don't have to drive the fanciest car in order to be. But he says obviously that's a need. It's not a money need. It's an emotional need. And covet is also an emotional need. So you would have to fill it. This is an interesting point of how far this this can go. Anyway, in other words, what he's bringing out is that the la'ashra is not for money; it's for emotions. If that's the case, covet is also important. So you got. It's important to give people the covet that they need, not necessarily what. And I know it's not necessarily in the Hasidic jargon, but it is the idea of giving people what they need, and that's important. Probably goes into Avos Yisrael too. All right, everybody, be well. Have a great day. Atzlocha Rabba. Sei gesund.